It has to do with that fundamental conviction of the rational intelligibility of the universe, which is part of the faith, and I say that word advisedly because Einstein used it, of all scientists. We have been duped into thinking that faith is a religious concept and it means believing where there's no evidence. That is doubly and seriously and tragically wrong. Faith that is believing in no evidence is blind faith and is very dangerous. And the new atheists are right to point to it. But the Christian faith, and I can only speak for the Christian faith, is not blind, it's evidence-based. That's why at its heart is the historic event of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So it is a conviction based on evidence, and that is same as science. All scientists believe that the universe is rationally intelligible. You wouldn't do any science if you didn't believe it. And as Polkinghorne points out, science is powerless to explain its faith in the rational intelligibility of the universe, because you can't do any physics until you believe it. So why should it matter to science? I think it matters because people are concerned about who they are. And our identity is in part given to us by our past. A person who forgets their past, who has amnesia, often forgets who they are. You have to build up their identity by painstakingly clicking them back into their past experiences. Now, the big story that each of us search for, the meta-narrative of existence, and we're all looking for it. Walk into any bookshop and see the shelf space devoted to the origins of the universe. Why is there such interest? Because it's a story into which people claim that we can fit. This is our story. And why it matters is simply this, that many vocal people are arguing that science has the cultural authority to give us the essence of that story. And no other voice is allowed. That is scientism. And that, I think, is seriously defective. And that is why it matters, I think. It matters on the biggest question of all, who you think you are. Now, there are 4 more questions. I can't face, I can't face. I'd be delighted to spend another hour. I'm going to take what's common to them. And what's common to them is Richard Dawkins' knockdown argument in the book The God Delusion. If you claim, he will say, after I finished all of this, and he said it to me, so I'm not telling tales out of school. If you claim that God created the universe, well, first of all, that's no explanation at all, because by definition, God is more complex than the universe you're explaining. Secondly, if you claim that God created the universe, then you have to logically ask who created God, and who created the God that created the God that created the God that created, and so on. Sounds brilliant, doesn't it? I think it's very silly, ladies and gentlemen. Let me analyze it briefly. God is no explanation at that ultimate level because he's more complex than what you're explaining. So I pick up a book, and it's called The God Delusion. It's 400 pages long. It's very complex. But then I discover that it emanates from the brain of one Richard Dawkins, which is infinitely more complex, at least I think he believes that, than the book itself. So therefore, by definition, that is no explanation, since the explanation is more complicated than the thing you're explaining. There's something wrong with that, isn't there? And Brian Davis, fellow of the Royal Society, who's just a brilliant mathematician, has just written a book on beliefs in science. And he points out the elementary fact that explanations are often very much more complex than the thing you're explaining. And he imagines an attempt to explain a paper clip. Very simple, isn't it? But if you're going to explain it completely, you have to go into steel making, paper, everything. You see, we've been bamboozled into thinking that explanation must inevitably be reductionist from the complex to the simple. Now, that is a very important methodology in science, that kind of methodological reductionism. But ontological reductionism will not do, because in many areas our explanation is more complex, and that is the fun of it. Incidentally, isn't it odd? Let me leave you with this little thing. You see, is there a beach at Dundee? I haven't determined that yet. There is a beach. Well, you go down to the beach in Dundee, and you see a few letters of your name in the sand, and you immediately infer upwards to intelligent causation, don't you? And then you go into the laboratory. There's a special laboratory in Oxford that hasn't been invented yet, and it's got a magic stereoscopic microscope in it. Through it you see a double helix uncoiling and spitting off letters C-G-A-T-T-C-G-A-A-T-C, G. 3.5 billion of them in exactly the right order, like a computer program. And you ask, well, what's the ultimate reason for that? Chance and necessity. What? Chance and the laws of nature, yes. It strikes me, ladies and gentlemen, there's something odd going on. How is it that 3 letters of our name in a language spell intelligence and 3.5 billion letters in a code spell simply chance and necessity? I'm not denying that chance and necessity do a great deal. That's not the point. It's the question of what is the text saying. But I haven't answered the question. Here it comes. Who created God? Well, if you ask the question, who created God, you're assuming that God was created, aren't you, by definition? But what if God wasn't created? Then the question falls. You see, hidden in the question is the assumption. If I suddenly find my wallet is gone this evening after I've finished speaking, and I say to you, who stole my wallet? Well, the assumption is that somebody's stolen it, but I might have just forgotten it, and my wife would tell me that's the most likely explanation. In other words, when you ask who created God, you have immediately closed down the range of possible explanations in terms of a created God. If Richard Dawkins had written a book called The Created God's Delusion, I suspect it wouldn't have sold many copies, because we don't need him or anybody else to tell us that created gods are a delusion. Ladies and gentlemen, the central claim of Christianity is that God already existed. The Word already was. He wasn't created. The universe was created. But then it's a wicked thing in me, but then I'm Irish, albeit of Scottish descent. But I did turn the question round on Richard Dawkins. I said, that question works both ways, Richard. You believe that it's legitimate to ask who created the creator. Okay, let's try. You believe the universe created you. Who created your creator? I'm still waiting for an answer. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've got a very hard job to do now to thank John Lennox for his fantastic lecture. And I think, first of all, I should thank him for 2 things. First of all, for establishing an entirely new precedent, which is taking his own questions and answering them, and in so doing, so squeezing short the time for this vote of thanks that it will have to be mercifully short. Secondly, for filling this and other lecture theatres. I believe he gave a lecture in Swansea recently that attracted 700 to the lecture, but we have beaten this tonight. I will find out by exactly how much later. But it is really a testament to all the spirit of Dundee, if you like, the university, and all those who come out regularly to our public lectures. It's been such a great turnout tonight, and of course, it's a great tribute to John for the interest that he and his books and his speaking tonight have generated. Now, I stand here extremely nervously because at the very start of the lecture, John dismantled the opening statements in Stephen Hawking's new book by pointing out that the statement "philosophy is dead" is thrice contradictory. And therefore, I cannot imagine that I will not say at least 10 contradictory things in the next few minutes. And I think probably one of the things that I sort of learned from this was that Hawking committed really one of the fundamental sins of science by trying to prove the non-existence of something. I was always taught right at the start of my research career that it was a bad idea, and also you'd never get a grant if the first, if what you wrote in your grant application was you were trying to prove something didn't exist. It's actually very hard to do, especially if it's the pet theory of one of your competitors. But another thing I learned was something called Occam's razor, which requires that those doing research adopt the simplest interpretation of the available information. And I was then struck by one of the statements that John made about from Hawking's book, which was "We are products of quantum variations in the early universe," which I thought was a particularly unappealing way to think about Occam's razor as a simple interpretation. And I can understand why that leads to people philosophizing about God or other ways to think about our existence. I must admit, in my philosophy has tended towards the agnostic argument because I find it hard to grasp why one needs to require the necessity for God. That has been my feeling. But what worries me now is that I'm about to have dinner with and when I did the table layout, I put John next to me. So watch this space, and you may see a change of mind. The other point I wanted to make was that we've just come to the end of our celebration of Darcy Thompson, a great biologist, one of the founding professors of this university. And Darcy Thompson was famous as a polymath. And in his book on growth and form, he really brought together multiple disciplines of mathematics, of biology, physics, and his artistic talents. And I think we've seen tonight in John's lecture that polymathism, maybe that's not the word, is alive and well, and that in the world of philosophy, bringing somebody with a great mathematical mind has produced a synthesis which has been both, I think, illuminating, interesting, and certainly extremely entertaining. And so with those words, and with great trepidation for tonight's dinner, can I just finish by offering John this gift to show our appreciation for his lecture.